From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report. This weekend, we're in San Antonio this week for CattleCon, and here's what's in store over the next 60 minutes. The U.S. cattle herd just keeps shrinking. That's as the U.S. beef herd hits a 64-year low. Is it setting the stage for cattle prices to continue their historic run?
I'll just put it this way, it's paying some bills.
Prices are good, but producers are nervous it's too good. We'll tell you why. Tariff whiplash.
Canada thinks we're fighting a trade war with them. That's not the case here. This is a drug war.
President Trump delays tariffs on two of our top three trading partners for another month. Plus, what would it be like with a world without cows?
The truth of the matter is, cows are not to blame.
A documentary that's compelling and could change the way cows are viewed around the globe. Well, we're coming to you from this year's cattle convention, the annual cattle industry convention and NCBA trade show, where the size of this year's cattle herd is the talk. The latest USDA cattle inventory report confirmed the smallest cattle inventory since the early 1950s at 86.7 million head. That's down another 1% from a year ago. And the report also indicating there's no sign of rebuilding. We're going to dive much more into these numbers. And the numbers released here by Cattle Facts coming up in our roundtable discussion. Another situation we've been keeping a close eye on this week is President Trump's plan to tack on tariffs for some of our top trading partners. However, just hours before 25% tariffs were due to kick in on products coming from Mexico and Canada, President Trump put them on hold for both countries for 30 days. It comes after Mr. Trump says Mexico agreed to deploy 10,000 Mexican soldiers to U.S.-Mexico border to combat fentanyl, trafficking, and illegal migration. The U.S. in return will strengthen efforts to stop the flow of weapons into Mexico. Meanwhile, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau confirmed his country's commitment to bolstering border security with $1.3 billion in funding, adding 10,000 border personnel, and the creation of a fentanyl czar to combat drug-related crime.
The difference between Mexico and Canada thus far is that Canada thinks we're fighting a trade war with them. That's not the case here. This is a drug war. And I think it's important that if Canadian citizens themselves can understand that what we are trying to do here is stop the killing of Americans by these deadly drugs, to stop Canada from allowing terrorists on the watch list, up to 100 have already come in, from entering our country. That will be the way to find a resolution of this problem.
Meanwhile, a 10% tariff did go into effect on China this week, and Beijing hit back with its own broad package of economic measures, adding tariffs of 10 or 15% on a number of American imports. It plans to implement a 15% tariff on coal and liquefied natural gas products, as well as a 10% tariff on crude oil, ag machinery, and large engine cars imported from the U.S. The tariffs are scheduled to take effect next Monday. We spoke here at CattleCon with Dan Holstrom, the president and CEO of the U.S. Meat Export Federation. He says he's optimistic about revisiting the Phase 1 trade deal with China.
So I think, especially the beef industry, it was a home run agreement, the Phase 1. So hopes for a Phase 2, I think, while not certain by any means, we're hopeful.
Well, the remains of all 67 victims of a mid-air collision near Reagan National Airport have been recovered, and we've learned a couple of farmers were killed in that crash. Farmers Bob and Lori Schrock of Kiowa, Kansas, died. News reports say the couple was flying to Washington, D.C. in order to get on a train to next head to Philadelphia in order to visit their daughter, who is a college student there. Reuters says the Schrocks owned and operated a grain farm in Kiowa called Premium Grain. Their obituary says the two worked as a team to transform their family farm into a thriving, innovative agriculture business. All right, that's it for the news. It was nearly 90 degrees to start the week here in San Antonio for CattleCon, but another shot of cold air hit parts of the U.S. as well as ice. We'll have a check of your weather coming up next.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Pioneer. Pioneer brand corn hybrids are #1 for a reason. They deliver game-changing yields and winning profit potential season after season. Put the industry leader in your fields and make this your best year yet.
Well, one of the reasons cattle producers originally cut the U.S. cattle herd was drought, and it's something we're still keeping a close eye on in parts of the West Plains and even in the East. Meteorologist Jack Van Meter has more.
Starting out with our drought monitor on the East Coast, we are still seeing below average amounts of precipitation, and that's actually starting to go into a deficit that's actually being registered by the drought monitor. Take a look at New Jersey, actually having parts of the state, I should say, will be in that extreme drought. Moving out to the West Coast, we can see for the four corner states and parts of Southern California still seeing extreme drought, and actually some of the parts of the country actually seeing exceptional drought. West Texas, of course, still going to be dry, but the one cause for concern, of course, is going to be the Dakotas into Nebraska, as we can see moderate drought throughout much of those states, and actually some severe drought really starting to spread. And the whole reason for that is the lack of snowfall. Here's our snowfall estimate through much of the weekend, and as we can see, not a lot of moisture and snowfall will be falling for parts of the country. As we can see, pretty much from southern, or I should say central Indiana upwards, we're going to be seeing right around a ½ inch of snow, and then going up into Michigan. It's where we can see right around 3 to maybe even 6 inches of snow, especially for those western coasts of Lake Michigan there, where the lake effect will actually turn on. But again, going out to the plains, South Dakota, Nebraska, no snow on the ground, and unfortunately doesn't look like a lot of snow is in the forecast and will fall. So it's something, again, we're keeping a rather close eye on. Take a look at this rather dynamic temperature outlook for the middle of the month. We're talking from the 11th going all the way up past Valentine's Day to the 15th. And as we can see, for much of the country, we're talking back below average temperatures. As we can see, cool temperatures spanning from northern Texas going all the way up through the Dakotas and parts of Montana, while warmer temperatures are really going to be persisting down to the south and to the east. And really, everybody down there is actually going to forget the fact that almost 8 inches of snow fell for some of those Gulf Coast states. And when we look at the precipitation outlook, we can see that much of the country really going to be dealing with, again, a dynamic period. As we make our way out to the west, again, we're talking atmospheric river that will still continuously almost print moisture off the coast there. We're talking a lot of rain showers, and for those higher elevation spots up in the mountains, we're going to be talking about some heavy snowfall. And as we can see, a lot of that energy will be transferring out, and as we can see, that bullseye kind of centered around Kentucky and parts of Tennessee for some above average rainfall.
Thanks, Jack. Well, it doesn't seem like there are signs of any rebuilding in the U.S. cattle herd taking place. Is that actually the case? And what will it take to change producers' minds and start growing the herd again? I'm really looking forward to the panel we have lined up at CattleCon this week. Don Close, Casey Mabry, and Daryl Peel join us on stage next.
U.S. Farm Report on the road from the 2025 NCBA Cattle Convention is brought to you by Corteva Agriscience Range and Pasture Products. Slam the gate on weeds and brush. And by Merck Animal Health. At Merck Animal Health, we are shaping the future of animal health with pioneering science and innovative technology solutions for our customers. We are proud to introduce SenseHub Cow-Calf, a first-of-its-kind technology to optimize reproductive management in beef cows.
Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend from right here at CattleCon in San Antonio. We have a great marketing roundtable. I told you before the break, Casey Mabry, as well as Don Close and Daryl Peel, really to take a deep dive into these markets. Daryl, let's start by looking at the most recent USDA cattle inventory report. I mean, we knew that this cattle herd was shrinking, but it seems to just keep shrinking. Is there any signs that we're slowing down?
There are signs that we're slowing down. We certainly got smaller in 2024. That was actually kind of obvious about a year ago when you looked at heifer numbers. If you look at the heifer numbers in this report, we don't have a lot, and so we're gonna be challenged going forward to stop this liquidation. I think we might stabilize numbers this year, but I think growth is pretty much a long shot at this point.
I mean, Don, at this point, how low can we go?
I think we're getting really close to seeing the thing bottom. I think as Daryl referenced, I think the challenge is retaining enough heifers out of the supply that we have to provide the fuel for the build back.
Yeah, I mean, Casey, when you look at that report, there was a lot to take in from that report on Friday, but what was the biggest surprise for you?
The biggest surprise to me was really looking at the total calf crop report, because we're looking at the total cow inventory numbers. I think that probably caught some people off guard, having the calf crop a little bit bigger than what most people's expectations were.
Yeah, so when you look then, I mean, maybe there's signs, maybe we're thinking about starting to rebuild, and there's some of those hints. What is it going to take to change producers' mind, Daryl?
Well, I think it's mostly a matter of time. I mean, producers have to change their expectations. I think coming into this, producers needed high prices. They needed to recover financially. They needed to be able to sell stuff. We've got a lot of that done now, maybe not completely. But the other thing is we need to have some notion that this is going to last long enough that we want to make this investment. And that takes a little time to change those expectations, but I do think it's happening.
Well, and Don, last year, I remember you made the point that, we're seeing some of these older producers exit the business, getting out while these prices are high. Since then, have we seen more producers, and is that a concern when you look at possibly rebuilding?
We've continued to see an active pace of total dispersal sales. Certainly with the appetite that we have had for cull cows for a year to 18 months now, those cows are readily removed from the system. I think I'd follow up with what are they looking for as that trigger to start the rebuild. I think we're finally getting the price message across. But as we continue to hear concerns from the weather people and the risk of La Nina, and will they have the grass to support extra numbers, is probably a holding point right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Casey, we've seen cash cattle hit records. I mean, as you look at the rest of this year, what are some of your price projections right now?
Yeah, so incentive drives outcome, and obviously with grain prices as cheap as they've been and cattle prices as high as they've been, we've held on to some cattle. So it's kept the front end of the market really, really tight, and it's kept packers chasing after cattle. So it probably ran $10 or $15 higher, in my opinion, what we should have really here on the front end. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how we go through the back end of this thing. We probably got to work through some stuff right here on the front end. But if the analysts continue to say we're going to be tighter and demand stays pretty good, we'll probably see prices exceed where we were before.
Don, do you agree with that?
I do. I think with the cost of gain and the value of gain ratio as out of balance as it is, there's every incentive to cattle feeders to continue to make them bigger. The one thing that I am concerned with, if you take the 50-pound escalation in live weights that we saw in 24, but if you look at the 1,000-pound carcass discounts, it kind of a soft rule right now, but also for the grid sellers, as they get those steers big enough that they're starting to get yield grade 4s and 5s and start looking at carcass discounts, that's going to put a cap on how much additional weight we can put on the cattle that are on feed today.
Other news this week, reopening the southern border to feeder cattle from Mexico. We're going to talk about that real quick, though. We need to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with more U.S. Farm Report. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend from right here at CattleCon. All right, news this week that we're reopening the southern border to Mexico. I mean, there was talk earlier this month that it was going to happen. Now it looks like it's actually going to happen. We're also having this talk of tariffs in Mexico, even though it has been delayed for a month. What do you think could have the bigger impact on this market, reopening that border or the threat of tariffs to goods from and to Mexico?
Well, the whole tariff thing is a source of so much uncertainty. And markets don't like uncertainty, so I think that's a big part of it. The numbers with reopening the border, we're going to dribble those cattle in. I don't see that as a major shock to the market. We changed the timing on these cattle. Most of them that were going to come will probably still come eventually, but I don't think it's going to be a major shock to the market in the short run.
Don, do you think it's going to be a shock?
No, and we've done a deep dive looking at a fresh look at the total inventory numbers in Mexico. We've looked at the rate of shipments over the last 2 years as they've had drought constraints in Mexico, just like we've had here. So even with the delay, I don't think we've created a big backlog, and I do not think they've got the numbers on hand to ship at the rate they did in both 23 and 24.
Casey, I mean, we know that this market, it's been a product of shrinking supplies and then really strong demand. But I talked to cattle producers here at NCBA, and they're nervous. They're nervous about how high prices are. They're nervous about what impact it's going to have at consumer demand. Have we seen any sign that consumers are starting to pull back on the beef that they're buying?
You know, the most interesting thing is the last couple of days, I mean, just looking at today, we haven't really seen the cutout values escalate like we thought we would with kill cuts. And the kill cuts haven't necessarily been published yet, but we've seen some backing up of the USDA cutout. Demand, however, stays extremely good. We continue to import a tremendous amount of meat from overseas, and that's also getting consumed here.
Yeah, Don, I mean, when you look at demand, you think that this can continue?
Because we've known supplies are tight, we've spent more time on the demand side of the equation in the last 2 years than we ever have before. We don't see any signs at all of any consumer slowdown. And we actually look at the demand for prime in the upper two-thirds of choice. When we look at the demand for ground beef and those products, each independently they're all growing. Then we measure it beef against the other animal proteins, and beef continues to gain on the other species. We don't see any slowdown yet.
You know, Daryl, we're in uncharted territory. I mentioned that when it comes to prices, and I mentioned that producers are nervous. I mean, it's almost scary how high prices have gotten. What is your advice, though, for producers to manage risk? I mean, you look at some of the other markets, we know as fast as we came up, it could be quicker on the downside. What advice do you have producers to manage that risk?
Well, you know, again, we're very bullish and still bullish in general going forward for average prices. But we also know that we're subject to a lot of shocks right now. We've seen a couple already. We're certainly vulnerable. There's a lot of air below us. This market is so high. So producers really need to still do that risk management. They need to think about those marketing windows. And if you got caught in a shock in one of those, it could really be devastating to you.
Don, what is your advice for producers in 2025?
At the price levels we're at and just any measured retracement in the market, it could take you out of the game. It is absolutely, at these price levels, it is absolutely imperative to have some kind of price risk management program in place.
Casey, what do you want to leave producers with?
Yeah, I think you just need to run with what I call a keen sense of paranoia. I mean, be bullish, be excited about the market, but don't get overly euphoric. We got to remember back, a short 3 or 4 years ago, we were all in the doldrums and very scared, and there was a lot of people that were telling their kids to get into a different business.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden we're all jumping on the bandwagon of cattle and getting excited about this. So we want to make sure that you guys are running your businesses like businesses and not gambling on cattle.
All right, well, we really appreciate you joining us. We need to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with more U.S. Farm Report.
Hey folks, welcome back to Tractor Tales. This week, join me as we head to Texas to check out a 1941 John Deere B. It's from a one-owner family.
This is a 1944 B. It's styled, and my daddy bought it when it was a year old, and he farmed with it all his life. It was the only tractor he ever had. It's the 4th generation. She's on the same farm where he farmed, and that's where we live now. He farmed cotton, corn, hay, and he had cattle also, and a grade B dairy. He wouldn't let me mow. He was afraid I'd get hurt, but he let me ride on the drill when he was drilling in maize and stuff like that.
Before he bought this tractor, he was plowing with horses and mules, and when he got the tractor, even after that, he would plow the gardens for the community with horses and mules. Okay. So he kept plowing. In fact, he died the day he was plowing his garden.
In 2011, a man in Farmersville restored it for us completely, took it completely apart and put it back together. Oh, it was in running condition when he did it. We just wanted it repainted and stop the oil leaks if we could. We show some. We belong to the Wiley Antique Tractor Club, and we go to shows in Texas and Oklahoma in places, and mainly just she stays at the farm. She's semi-retired. She likes to take the grandkids on a tour and the great-grandkids.
Thanks, Greg. Well, no matter if I talk to a cattle producer here who's been in the business 10 years or 50 years, they tell me they've never seen a market like this. So why are some producers actually nervous about prices? And how much higher could we go? That's our Farm Journal report with Michelle Rook next.
You're watching U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition.
Well, the mood here at CattleCon in San Antonio this year is positive. The cattle markets are in uncharted waters, as we talked about in our marketing roundtable, and a moisture, at least for some areas, has definitely improved. But there's also a sense of nervousness, and if these prices are actually too good. Michelle Rook joins us now from CattleCon for this year's Farm Journal report. And Michelle, a question I keep hearing is, just how high can we go with these markets?
Yes, cattle prices are at record high levels and could stay that way for a while, according to the latest USDA cattle inventory report. It confirmed the smallest inventory in nearly 65 years at 86.7 million head and showed no sign of rebuilding. But it's not just all about supply. Strong demand is also supporting the cattle market and an outlook for more historical prices ahead. Missouri cow-calf producer Pat Wood recently sold his calves for some eye-popping prices. He says he's never seen anything like it in the 50 years he's been raising cattle.
My last year in 4-H, I got Grand Champion steer at Pettis County and sold it for 50, I think it was 55 or 57 cents a pound. And people after the sale was over, they come up to me and says, "You'll never see that again. That's the highest you'll ever see it." And now then it's over $3 a pound.
The record prices have been a result of historically tight supplies, confirmed in USDA's cattle inventory report. It showed total numbers down nearly 500,000 head from last year, and the cow herd at a 75-year low with little evidence of heifer retention.
Saw really no growth in the top 10 cow states on the beef side. Total inventory was down about 150,000 cows, which we expected given where cow slaughter down 18% for the year. We just didn't put any heifers back in the top of the system last year. They're actually all going through slaughter right now.
But heifer retention, we're not seeing that yet. We're starting to see plateau, so it would suggest that your beef cow herd's the bottom end of the cycle.
So why is the herd rebuild so slow, especially compared to the last bull market in 2014-15?
Even though moisture conditions last year were better than the 3 previous years, by no means are they great. And the weather forecaster will suggest we're still in the La Nina pattern.
Well, you have to have a place to put them, so we need rain in the right areas. And once again, as these people pay down debt and so forth, they can afford to keep a heifer rather than turn her into cash and pay down debt, and just want to. Some of these people, if they're old enough, maybe they don't want to rebuild.
That means we aren't even into the tightest numbers yet, and that could continue through 2026 and 2027.
The number of heifers that are here today, they're not going to be putting a calf on the ground for 2 years, right? And so we know for 2 years we're not going to see a dramatic change in that.
But it's not just supply that's driving the record market. Strong export demand in 2024 helped, with the surge in business in Southeast Asia.
We're running about 5 or 6% up right now through 11 months. Our estimate is that we're going to come in around 10.5 billion in sales globally, which would be our second highest year ever.
Plus, U.S. consumers haven't experienced sticker shock from higher beef prices yet.
2024 was an absolutely fantastic year for beef demand. On an index basis, we're up about 4.4% for the year. Real per capita deflated spending actually up 5% for the year.
So how many more cattle are needed to meet consumer demand?
So it's going to take about 30.3 million cows, about 2.5 million more cows than we have today, just to keep those per capita supplies.
But it would be more without the heavier weights, which are creating virtual cattle.
Last year we had a record 1-year increase. It was 26 pounds in 1 year. That offset basically 1 million head of harvest cattle.
Needless to say, the outlook is still for more record prices in 2025.
We would have the calf market this year averaging closer to 330 to 340 on a steer calf. That contrasts to 310 last year. If we went to a yearling 7.5 weight steer, U.S. average, we would put that at about 270 this year versus about 248 last year. And take that to the Fed value. This year we would suggest about a 198 average compared to 186 average last year.
And the good news is the cow-calf sector is seeing some real profitability, while feedlots are also making money, even with high break-evens.
But I'm sure that we have a lot of people that are buying break-evens that are over $2 fat cattle for 2025, which are at really, highly elevated levels. So some of the highest break-even levels we've probably ever seen in the industry.
That's making risk management more important than ever.
There's too many dollars out there to have nothing on board, and that's where LRP really comes into play with setting that price floor, so you've got that protected downside to keep the upside.
And hopefully that upside will last for a while. I'm Michelle Rook for U.S. Farm Report.
Thanks, Michelle. Well, the U.S. government deciding to reopen Mexico's border to feeder cattle imports. We'll tell you why in Ag Around the World next. The U.S. is reopening the country to imports of cattle and bison from Mexico. USDA announcing APHIS and Mexico have agreed to and are implementing a comprehensive pre-clearance inspection and treatment protocol. That's after imports were shut down in November following a positive detection of New World screwworm. Officials say APHIS has now visited, inspected, and approved the safeguards put in place in Mexico. In the last 2 years, NWS has spread north of the barrier throughout Panama and into Costa Rica and even further north. One of our largest corn markets, Mexico, updating its stance on GMOs this week. The Ministry of Economy lifting its restrictions on GMO corn and glyphosate imports following a ruling we told you about by a USMCA dispute panel. While Mexico's new guidance allows for GM corn imports, the country is holding fast to a ban on planting GM crops and still plans to phase out the use of those varieties and glyphosate domestically. Well, possibly next in President Trump's crosshairs for tariffs, the EU. Mr. Trump renewing his criticism of the European Union. He accuses it of exploiting the U.S. on trade, particularly when it comes to autos and agriculture. EU leaders are now calling for unity and a collective response.
We will be ready for tough negotiations where needed and to find solutions where possible. To work out any grievances and to set the foundations for a stronger partnership. We will be open and pragmatic in how to achieve that. But we will make it equally clear that we will always protect our own interests, however and whenever that is needed. This will always be the European way.
The president of the European Commission says she wants to start negotiations with the U.S. early instead of waiting for President Trump to make good on his tariff threats. That's a glimpse of Ag Around the World. Well, what's one way producers can manage their pastures even more and take advantage of these high prices? That is next.
Flip Your Soil on U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Smart Nutrition MAP Plus MST. Experience the most efficient system for delivering sulfur and phosphate to meet your crop's needs with Smart Nutrition MAP Plus MST.
Well, with the current cattle markets, producers are really doing everything they can to capture these higher prices. And one way is through even better forage management. Did you know by removing a pound of weeds from a cow's diet, it actually adds a pound or more to the cattle? And there's now a new tool for cattle producers to better control the weeds they don't want while leaving the valuable feed sources like white clover in the fields. We explore that this weekend in Flip Your Soil. A prolific perennial plant.
It can grow in a lot of places.
That often sprouts around the tall fescue belt of the Midwest, Mid-Atlantic, and in the Southeast.
It's high in TDN, so cattle really love it.
White clover is a legume that's a high-quality feed source for farmers and ranchers because it's a natural fertilizer source in their field.
But if you look at white clover on the agronomic side of it, it's a legume, so it fixates its own nitrogen. So it's adding nitrogen back into the pasture, which is a huge benefit for our farmers and ranchers because that's offsetting nitrogen inputs into the system.
And from an animal performance side, it's a very digestible plant that's high in protein.
We're getting more pounds of beef on that acre of land, so we're being more efficient. That's going to make farmers and ranchers excited.
Up until now, ranchers had a hard time controlling weeds without killing the valuable plant. But thanks to a revolutionary new herbicide called Novagraze, producers now have an option to keep white clover growing in their fields.
We heard from producers saying, hey, I want herbicides to be a part of my management plan because I know they pencil out and they make sense, but I want to preserve my white clover. And they didn't have that option until Novagraze herbicide came along.
A revolutionary option.
Really excited about that brand new tool in the toolbox for producers.
That could be good for the soil and for the cows. Well, up next, a cattle feeder who has left his mark on the industry. We'll introduce you to one of the new inductees into the Cattle Feeders Hall of Fame next.
Watch Markets Now with Michelle Rook on the Farm Journal YouTube channel, keeping you updated throughout the day on the markets at the open, midday, and close. Find out what moved the markets today and what to expect the market to do next.
The Cattle Feeders Hall of Fame was first established to honor the exceptional and visionary men and women who have made a lasting and meaningful contribution to the cattle feeding industry. And this year, one of the inductees is Joe Morgan, a first-generation cattle feeder whose success is built on a remarkable story of growth and strong relationships. Growing up in western Iowa, Joe Morgan was a farm kid with a dream to farm.
I started out farming, and then if you guys remember in the 80s how tough the farming was and high interest rates, and so I had to go find something else to do. I was able to save the farm, but that was about it.
An animal science major from Iowa State, his uncle ran a feed yard for years in Texas, and he and his dad had fed there as well.
So I was always infatuated with the feed yard environment and all the activity. So when the opportunity came up to manage that yard outside of Omaha, I took that job.
Within just a couple of years, Morgan had an opportunity to run a feed yard in Kansas, and that's exactly what he did.
We started out, you know, it was a 17,000 head yard and struggled like everybody did in the 80s. It was tough going, and Wayne and I stayed together. We've been partners ever since, and continually, you know, had some really good support from some people that mentored me and our banker.
In 1985, this feed yard featured 17,000 head, and in 40 years, Pokey Feeders has grown 505%. And of the 103,000 head of cattle that go through this feed yard today, 95% are customer cattle.
We focused on customers from the very beginning, and we concentrated on keeping the customer base, and we never were interested in feeding all the cattle ourselves. We just financially didn't have the capability in the early years, and then once we got the customer base built, I just stayed with that program.
A focus on customers and a competitive drive to grow, Pokey Feeders has customers across 14 states.
And that's what's really, I think, helped us, is because we have a wide customer base. When cattle are moving in the south, we have customers there. When the cattle are moving in the north, we have customers coming out of that area.
The culture here at Pokey is one that started 40 years ago, and here in western Kansas, Morgan will be the first to tell you it takes grit and guts to run a business here.
Well, it's been tough in the droughts the last several years, and there's not much you can overdo with that but just resiliency. But on the water issues, of course, we've just continued to, you know, purchase land when it came available with more wells to be able to convert to the livestock.
Morgan says when his son came home to help with the business, he brought fresh ideas.
And when Grant came home, he talked me into going into a water recycling project. So we're recycling approximately 80% of our yard now.
Water that is cleansed and then recycled.
A year ago, we recycled and used about 30 million gallons. So it's a huge project that we do.
Morgan also credits his son Grant with growing new relationships.
I was really concerned until the last several years is that our customer base was getting older and older, and they didn't seem to have any children interested in coming back. But in the last several years, I think part of it honestly is because of Grant's age. He's been able to communicate and build a relationship with some of our customers' children. And so we have been able to grow that, and he's actually got some younger customers than I had. And I think that's helped us as far as Pokey.
Today, Pokey's story is one of growth and success through a strong team, and Morgan's induction into the Cattle Feeder Hall of Fame honored that story this week.
Well, I was nominated last year at the convention, and then I think they notified me around the 1st of September this year.
So when they called you, what did you say?
Well, I was shocked, honestly, because I've attended these events ever since they started in Denver years ago, and never in my wildest dream, I watched all the people that walked up there and received it. I never dreamed that, I'd be receiving it.
A humbling moment, but one that honors a remarkable career, as Joe Morgan is truly a visionary in his field. Congratulations to Joe as well as Dan May of Stratton, Colorado, for being inducted into this year's Hall of Fame. When we come back, what would a world be like without cows? It's a compelling documentary and one that we are giving you a preview of next. Well, it is no secret cattle are often blamed when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions and the impact on the environment. But what would the world actually be like without cows? That is exactly what the team at Alltech traveled the world to find out. Mark Lyons, CEO of Alltech, hired 2 journalists to put together a documentary. And after traveling to 22 countries across 5 continents, visiting more than 40 locations around the globe, they put together a compelling piece that's meant to spark meaningful conversation and leave an impact. And this weekend, the team at Alltech agreed to allow us to show you a preview of that film. Here's a world without cows.
We share this planet with 1.5 billion cows, and that breaks down to 1 cow for every 5 of us.
Agriculture, forestry, and other land uses produce nearly half of the world's methane emissions.
Governor Jerry Brown today signed a bill regulating emissions from dairy cows. Law requires a 40% reduction in emissions.
The UN's latest report on global hunger shows we're moving backwards.
Well, the Lancet Medical Journal found that reducing red meat intake is one of the most effective ways to curb emissions.
We need to produce as much food as was produced in the last 10,000 years of human history.
What happens if we keep eating animal products on this scale is climate change continues to be exacerbated, which is tantamount to slow suicide.
Everything on the news, everything online, everything told us cows are negatively impacting our lives.
The truth of the matter is, cows are not to blame.
So here's the thing. We're filmmakers, and we work in agriculture for an animal health and nutrition company.
We travel the globe telling stories about sustainable farming. Together, we've been to 22 countries on 5 different continents. Literally around the world, farmers just open their doors to us.
And what we've experienced on these farms is completely different than what we're hearing.
We really started to question ourselves. What are we missing?
Maybe we're wrong. We wanted to put the pieces together to try to make sense of it.
We set out to explore one question. Are we better off in a world without cows?
Part of the reason why the world without cows is interesting because it forces people to have a different conversation.
Most people feel like there's a right and a wrong answer, but there's really not a right or wrong. It's just about choices and consequences.
When you really think about the impact it has, you can't throw it away. You can make it better.
At the end of the day, I don't think any of this can exist in a vacuum. This can't just be about culture and economy or feeding the growing population or about climate change.
It can't be about just one thing because all those things are tied together. Let's start a new narrative, one that sparks conversations and has the power to shape where we're headed. It's on each of us and all of us together to rise to the occasion. The solutions we seek are not distant and unattainable. They exist within our very reach.
As scientists, we can give you the first half of the information,
But the next is a social and political discussion, and that's where the conversation hasn't really started yet.
We can become part of a climate solution. We have to be very smart, not just how to do it, but also how to talk about it, regardless of how you view agriculture. I think we should all agree upon one thing. We want to minimize the environmental footprint and help our farmers to get there. Because without farmers, we cannot live.
What I do does impact many, many others. It's not my land. This belongs to everybody. This is only ours for a little while.
Just incredible. Everyone here at CattleCon actually got a chance to see it this week as well. If you want to learn more about the film or even request a screening, you can go to worldwithoutcows.com. And on a YouTube Extra, we actually sat down with the two filmmakers to hear about the most eye-opening part of their travels and interviews for that film. You can view that on Farm Journal's YouTube page. Well, that does it for U.S. Farm Report this weekend here in CattleCon in San Antonio. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to join us again next weekend as we head back to the studios to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.